Hollywood's golden age was glamorous, glittering, and seemingly perfect. But behind the cameras, the magic of the silver screen often masked a far darker truth. The stars audiences adored, the heartthrobs, the ingenues, the leading ladies, were not just acting on screen. They were performing an elaborate fiction off-screen too, one that could make or break their careers. From secret marriages to hidden children and carefully concealed sexualities, the studio system didn't just create movies, it manufactured entire lives. Studios controlled every detail of a star's public image with military precision. Gossip columnists, agents, and fixers worked overtime to ensure that reality never got in the way of profit. Careers weren't just managed, they were protected, manipulated, and sometimes entirely fabricated. In this world, truth was expendable, and deception was a necessary tool. Today, we're pulling back the curtain on 11 Golden Age Hollywood stars whose real lives were hidden behind polished facades. These are stories of secrecy, manipulation, and survival in a system that valued image above all else. Prepare to discover the shocking realities behind the icons you thought you knew. Rock Hudson. Rock Hudson was the kind of Hollywood icon who seemed impossible to break.
Votes of moviegoers all over the nation. Most popular actor of the year.
Rock Hudson.
Rock Hudson.
Rock Hudson.
Rock Hudson.
Pleased to make your acquaintance, ma'am. Oh, you.
Hiding in closets isn't going to cure you.
Tall, impossibly handsome, and crafted by the studio machine into the perfect leading man, he embodied the American dream of the 1950s. His characters were strong, tender, romantic, and safe. Everything audiences wanted from the man whose face dominated glossy magazine covers. But behind the scenes, Hudson lived within a cage of expectations that demanded perfection. The world praised him for his masculinity, yet that very image trapped him. His true identity, his relationships, and even his health were things he was forced to hide. For years, he walked a tightrope between fame and fear. Hudson's battle began long before the public ever suspected anything. In an era where Hollywood controlled every detail of its stars' lives, being gay was considered a career-ending scandal. Studio contracts weren't just about movies. They dictated how an actor lived, whom they appeared with, and what they were allowed to reveal. Hudson's personal life became an elaborate performance, one far more exhausting than anything he did on screen. Publicists arranged fake relationships. Tabloids were paid to look the other way. Parties were monitored. Friends were chosen carefully. Every step was strategic because one wrong move could destroy the image millions had fallen in love with. Then, in the early 1980s, everything changed. Hudson began suffering health issues he couldn't ignore. The disease that would later be known globally, AIDS, was still largely a mystery then. People whispered about it, feared it, and judged it harshly. Even within Hollywood, the stigma was enormous. To acknowledge being sick was risky. To reveal what kind of illness it was? Unthinkable. For a while, Hudson desperately tried to continue life as usual, hoping the world wouldn't notice the sudden weight loss or frailty. But the illusion couldn't last forever. When the truth came out, it hit Hollywood like an earthquake. Rock Hudson, the symbol of classic American masculinity, was not only gay, but dying of a disease most people knew almost nothing about. Headlines exploded, fans were stunned, reporters swarmed. But something unexpected happened next. Compassion began replacing shock. Hudson's courage to step forward forced the public to confront AIDS, not as a rumor or a distant tragedy, but as a human reality. His confession was more than a revelation. It shifted national awareness. It opened doors for funding, research, and empathy at a time when the world desperately needed all three. His final years were painful, but they were also historic. In the end, Rock Hudson didn't just star in movies. He changed the conversation surrounding a disease the world was too afraid to talk about. His legacy is no longer limited to his roles on screen. It lives in the awareness he helped create, the compassion he sparked, and the countless lives influenced by the attention his illness brought. Loretta Young. Loretta Young's career was the definition of Hollywood grace, elegance, and morality, at least on the surface. She was America's sweetheart, admired for her devout Catholic image, impeccable style, and talent that radiated from every frame. Yet behind that flawless facade, Young carried a secret that could have ended her career in an instant. During the filming of Call of the Wild in 1935, she became pregnant with Clark Gable's child. For anyone else, the scandal alone would have spelled professional ruin. But Young was determined not only to protect her career, but to shield her daughter from a world that might never accept her existence. In a move of breathtaking audacity, Young staged a fake adoption to raise her own child. The pregnancy required complete invisibility. She disappeared from public view under the guise of a vacation to recover from exhaustion, a common euphemism in Hollywood for anything from surgery to personal scandals. She traveled briefly abroad to solidify her alibi and then secretly returned to California to give birth. Once her daughter was born, Young's plan entered the next phase. She temporarily placed the baby in an orphanage, only to discover her during a search for a child to adopt. Publicly, it looked like Young had adopted an orphan, but in reality, she was raising her own biological daughter, Judy Lewis, under the pretense of adoption. This intricate deception was more than a personal strategy. It was a system-assisted survival tactic. Studio executives, publicists, and the press played their roles flawlessly, maintaining the narrative that Young was the moral, untarnished heroine. The entertainment industry's machinery made such fictions possible, enforcing the idea that a star's personal life could be entirely reconstructed to match a marketable ideal. Young's own decisions were guided not just by personal morality, but by a studio environment that offered her no acceptable alternatives. Acknowledging the pregnancy would have meant the end of her career. Abortion conflicted with her religious beliefs. Leaving the child unacknowledged would have invited endless speculation. Her solution was both practical and profoundly brave, maintaining appearances while creating a life in secret. The psychological toll on both mother and daughter was immense. Judy grew up with subtle hints of the truth, aware that her story was shrouded in fiction, and Young carried the lifelong weight of concealing such an intimate reality. Yet the deception also allowed Young to continue her work, starring in acclaimed films for decades and maintaining the moral image that the public adored. It was a testament to her resilience, intelligence, and understanding of Hollywood's ruthless system. Loretta Young's story reveals not only a personal secret kept under extraordinary pressure, but also the profound power of Hollywood's studio system. In an era when morality, marketability, and appearances dictated careers, the line between truth and fiction was carefully engineered, often at great human cost. Young's ingenuity ensured that she could live authentically as a mother, even if publicly she appeared to embody a perfectly constructed ideal of virtue and grace. For nearly 8 decades, she kept her secret hidden, leaving a legacy that is both inspiring and a sobering reminder of the lengths stars had to go to survive in Hollywood's golden age. Tab Hunter. Tab Hunter was the quintessential 1950s teen idol, blonde, charming, and impossibly handsome. He had the kind of smile that plastered itself across magazine covers, the type of face teenage girls in America dreamed of seeing in their bedrooms every day. On screen, he radiated wholesomeness, innocence, and the fantasy of the perfect boyfriend. But behind the camera, Hunter lived a life built on careful concealment, constantly performing a role far more demanding than any character he portrayed. He was gay, a fact the Hollywood studio system insisted had to remain invisible. The image of Tab Hunter as the all-American heterosexual heartthrob was not just encouraged, it was meticulously manufactured. Hunter's real name was Arthur Gellan, and like many stars of the era, he was remade into a marketable product. His transformation into Tab Hunter involved more than a name change. It required constant public appearances with studio-approved dates, carefully staged photographs, and a meticulously crafted narrative of heterosexual desirability. While he quietly pursued relationships with men in private, Hunter had to perform romantic interest in women for the cameras. Every smile, every gesture, every staged embrace was part of a carefully choreographed illusion designed to keep fans, the press, and the studios satisfied. His personal desires were forced into shadows, his authentic self existing only in secret, while the public consumed a fiction that bore little resemblance to reality. The cost of living this dual life was enormous. Maintaining the facade required constant vigilance, fear of exposure, and the emotional strain of pretending to be someone he was not. Hunter, like others of his generation, was acutely aware that a single slip could destroy everything he had worked for. The gap between who he was and who he had to be shaped his daily existence, leaving him emotionally isolated despite his fame. Relationships with men, like his significant partnership with actor Anthony Perkins, were hidden from the world, confined to private spaces and close friends. Meanwhile, the public remained blissfully unaware, adoring a persona that had been carefully constructed to sell tickets and magazines. As the 1960s arrived, Tab Hunter's career faced new challenges. Musical tastes changed, new teen idols emerged, and his meticulously constructed image began to lose its commercial value. Ironically, the pressures that had defined his peak years eased as fame waned, allowing him to live more authentically in private, though the public remained unaware of his truth. It wasn't until 2005, decades after his Hollywood heyday, that Hunter openly came out in his memoir, Tab Hunter Confidential, finally reconciling his public image with his authentic identity. The book revealed the immense personal cost of being forced to inhabit a fictional self for the sake of mass appeal, shining a light on the calculated manipulation inherent in the studio system. Hunter's story is a testament to the extreme length Hollywood went to preserve marketable illusions. His charming smile sold fantasies to millions, but it also masked a life lived in fear, secrecy, and constant performance. Ultimately, his courage to share his truth, even long after the peak of his fame, provides a rare glimpse behind the curtain of an industry that thrived on deception and reminds us of the human cost of constructing perfection for public consumption. Judy Garland. Judy Garland's brilliance on screen was undeniable, but the magic of her performances masked a deeply troubled reality. She was the ultimate child star, plucked from obscurity and molded into Hollywood's ideal of innocence and charm. From The Wizard of Oz to her many MGM musicals, Garland radiated sweetness, optimism, and talent, the perfect image of American girlhood. Yet beneath the glittering veneer, her life was marked by exploitation, control, and abuse that began in childhood and continued relentlessly throughout her career. The studio that celebrated her as a star also broke her, fueling addictions, insecurities, and emotional trauma that haunted her until her untimely death. Garland was signed to MGM at just 13 years old, entering a system that viewed child performers as products rather than people. Studio executives meticulously controlled her weight, appearance, and behavior, using criticism and fear to shape the ideal star. She was placed on strict diets, pressured to remain slim and compliant, and constantly reminded that she fell short compared to other young actresses. But the cruelty extended far beyond physical control. The studio also provided stimulants to keep her energetic during long, grueling shooting schedules, followed by sedatives to ensure she could rest. Garland, still a child, had no way to understand or consent to the chemicals that would later define much of her adult life. The very studio she trusted to nurture her talent actively contributed to her addiction, yet publicly, she was portrayed as the wholesome, bright-eyed girl everyone adored. The gap between Garland's public persona and private suffering was immense. On screen, she was cheerful, dependable, and enchanting. Off-screen, she struggled with anxiety, exhaustion, and dependency, often facing public scolding for behaviors that were direct results of studio mistreatment. Each breakdown was framed as a personal failure, not the consequence of systemic abuse. When production schedules faltered, publicists worked tirelessly to preserve her image rather than address the underlying harm, selling audiences the fiction of perfection, while the reality of Garland's life worsened behind closed doors. Her later years were marked by continued struggles. Even after leaving MGM, Garland faced addiction issues, mental health challenges, and personal instability, the long-term effects of years of manipulation and neglect. Yet she persisted professionally, delivering unforgettable performances, including her legendary Carnegie Hall concert in 1961 and her Oscar-nominated role in A Star is Born, 1954. Her artistry was inseparable from her pain. The emotion and vulnerability she projected on screen reflected the hardships she endured off-camera. Garland's tragic death at age 47 from an accidental overdose was the culmination of decades of exploitation and concealment. Hollywood had built an image, profited from it, and then let the person behind it crumble. She wasn't born broken. She was manufactured, molded, and ultimately consumed by a system that prized appearance over humanity. Judy Garland's life remains a stark illustration of how Golden Age Hollywood often prioritized profits over people, creating legends while simultaneously destroying the individuals who embodied them. Her story is both awe-inspiring for her talent and devastating for the human cost of her fame. Montgomery Clift. Montgomery Clift brought a new kind of masculinity to Hollywood, sensitive, introspective, and emotionally complex. Unlike the stoic, hard-edged leading men of his era, Clift's talent shone through vulnerability and nuance. Audiences adored his performances, yet few understood the private turmoil that fueled his on-screen brilliance. Clift was deeply closeted, grappling with his sexuality in a period when Hollywood and society at large offered no acceptance. His internal conflict wasn't simply about hiding who he loved. It became a defining aspect of his existence, shaping both his career choices and personal life. Clift's struggle was compounded by the high-pressure demands of the studio system. He maintained strict separation between his public and private identities, avoiding the elaborate heterosexual performances that many of his contemporaries were forced into. Unlike other stars who engaged in sham romances or marriages, Clift focused entirely on his craft, which, while protecting his career, created isolation. The constant vigilance required to conceal his authentic self intensified his anxiety and emotional strain, making his personal relationships difficult to sustain. In 1956, Clift's life took a dramatic turn with a near-fatal car accident that left him with facial injuries and chronic pain. Beyond the physical consequences, the accident added another layer to the private performance he maintained. The studios worked tirelessly to manage public perception, hiding the extent of his trauma, medication dependence, and psychological struggles. Fans continued to see the same talented, composed actor, unaware of the physical and emotional burdens he bore behind the scenes. Clift's private pain and public perfection existed in stark contrast, creating a life of relentless tension. He relied increasingly on alcohol and prescription drugs, a coping mechanism that became entwined with his professional obligations. Each performance demanded energy, charm, and composure, while internally he fought the constant pressure of a world that refused to accept his authentic identity. His death in 1966, at just 45, was a tragic culmination of a life divided, highlighting the costs of a system that valued marketable images over human well-being. Clift's story reminds us that brilliance can mask profound suffering and that the Hollywood dream often demanded sacrifices that went far beyond talent alone. Sal Mineo. Sal Mineo rose to fame as the troubled, iconic sidekick Plato in Rebel Without a Cause, 1955, a role that cemented him as a youthful heartthrob of post-war Hollywood. Yet behind Mineo's on-screen charm lay a life caught between authenticity and concealment. Unlike fully closeted stars, Mineo existed in a delicate middle ground, open among friends, but forced to remain closeted publicly. This dual existence reflected Hollywood's evolving approach to sexuality, where talent was valued, but public acknowledgement of queerness remained taboo. Mineo's career and personal identity were intertwined in complex ways. His sensitive performances resonated with audiences, yet the very traits that made him compelling, emotional depth, vulnerability, and subtle masculinity, were coded as signs of his sexuality in an industry that feared deviation from heteronormative norms As a result, MINEO faced significant professional constraints. Leading roles were scarce once whispers about his personal life circulated, relegating him to supporting parts and sensitive sidekick characters. The qualities that fueled his artistry became liabilities in a culture obsessed with appearances. MINEO attempted to navigate these pressures with courage and creativity, seeking projects that allowed him to explore complex identities. Yet Hollywood's response was subtle marginalization. He was not blacklisted outright, but doors closed quietly. His attempts to assert authenticity were met with an industry unwilling to challenge established norms, forcing him to continue balancing personal truth against professional survival. Tragically, MINEO's life was cut short in 1976 when he was murdered outside his West Hollywood apartment. Sensationalized media coverage fixated on his rumored sexuality rather than his artistic contributions, illustrating that even in death, the industry and press reduced him to a persona defined by secrecy and scandal rather than talent and humanity. MINEO's story highlights the precarious position of LGBTQ actors navigating fame in an era of limited acceptance, a life lived partially in the shadows and partially in defiance of them, ultimately silenced too soon. Marlene Dietrich. Marlene Dietrich was Hollywood's ultimate boundary crosser, a star who defied conventions of sexuality and gender while retaining immense commercial appeal. Unlike many contemporaries forced into complete secrecy, Dietrich navigated a delicate balance between revelation and concealment. Privately bisexual, she maintained relationships with women while projecting a carefully curated public persona that emphasized her allure and heterosexual romances. This approach allowed her to push cultural boundaries subtly, integrating aspects of her authentic identity into public performances without provoking career-ending scandal. Dietrich's strategy was ingenious. She incorporated gender and sexual fluidity into her roles, famously wearing tuxedos and kissing women on screen, framing these acts as theatrical, not personal choices. The studio publicity machine downplayed her relationships with women, highlighting marriages and affairs with men to satisfy mainstream audiences. This selective presentation allowed Dietrich to cultivate personal freedom. The solution Young devised was extraordinary. She staged a fake adoption to conceal her daughter's existence while raising her in secret. Young disappeared from Hollywood under the guise of a vacation to recover from exhaustion, a common euphemism in the studio system for any number of scandals. During this period, she traveled briefly abroad to establish an alibi, then secretly returned to give birth in November 1935. She placed her daughter temporarily in an orphanage before publicly adopting her as if she had been found by chance. This elaborate fiction became the official narrative, maintained for decades to shield Young's career and reputation. Her daughter, Judy Lewis, bore a striking resemblance to Gable, including his distinctive ears. Yet she grew up under the pretense of adoption, sensing the hidden truths, but denied confirmation until Young revealed the reality to her authorized biographer just before her death in 2000. This deception was not merely personal. It required full participation of the studio system, compliant press, and a network of fixers who perpetuated the narrative. Young's extraordinary measures highlight the extreme pressures placed on women in Hollywood and the lengths to which the industry would go to protect profitability over human truth. The psychological impact extended to both mother and child. Judy Lewis described the tension and confusion of growing up in a fabricated reality, while Young carried the burden of concealment for nearly 80 years. This story illuminates the broader machinery of Golden Age Hollywood, demonstrating its power to control narratives and rewrite reality. Young didn't simply hide a secret. She orchestrated a lifetime of illusion, a testament to both her ingenuity and the ruthless demands of the studio system. The glitz, the glamour, the red carpets, all of it was only part of the story. Behind every perfect smile, every on-screen romance, and every public appearance, there were secrets carefully concealed. From Rock Hudson's hidden love life to Loretta Young's secret child, These stars paid enormous personal costs to maintain the illusions Hollywood demanded. The Golden Age was not just an era of unforgettable films, it was a masterclass in deception, control, and survival under an industry that could erase a person's identity as easily as it created one. Today we remember these stars not just for their performances, but for the courage it took to navigate a world that allowed no room for authenticity. Their stories are reminders of the human cost behind fame and the invisible battles waged behind the spotlight. The Hollywood you thought you knew was only half the story. These 11 lives show the hidden reality that defined an era, revealing the fragility and strength of those who lived it.